Hello and welcome to Stories of Science. Here, we look back on humanity's long journey to understand the world. The questions, the failures, and the breakthroughs that slowly changed how we see the universe and ourselves. We tell science as stories. They won a Nobel Prize together, while arguing opposite theories. You think your brain is one solid chunk? Nope, not even close. It's not a blob, not some squishy, uniform jelly. It's more like a city, crowded, loud, chaotic. And here's the twist, there's no mayor. Inside that city, billions of residents. Each one thinking, each one signaling, each one making decisions. Sound familiar? Yeah. It's basically us. A society. A living network. A non-stop conversation. But here's the real question. How did we figure that out? Because today, it feels obvious: neurons, synapses, signals firing back and forth. Page 1 of any neuroscience textbook. But rewind to the 19th century. Different story. Back then, the dominant belief was simple: the brain is one continuous mass. No gaps. No individual units, just a seamless, pudding-like structure. Scientists looked through their microscopes, nodded, and said, yep, one piece. Case closed. Except, it wasn't. Because then, someone showed up. And let's just say he wasn't exactly promising. Not a child prodigy, not a polished academic. If anything, he looked like trouble. As a kid, he once did something unforgettable. He blew up his neighbor's door. Not metaphorically, literally. Boom. You can imagine how that went over. His father didn't just scold him, he made a decision. Books aren't working? Fine. You're going to work. So the future pioneer of neuroscience became a barber's apprentice. Yeah. Scissors. Haircuts. Small talk. If you think that's strange, wait. He later joined the army, went to war, nearly died. Disease, hunger, chaos. At one point, his life was hanging by a thread. Not exactly the resume of someone destined to reshape human understanding. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Because this man, armed with nothing more than a pen and paper, started to draw. Line after line, branch after branch. At first, simple. Then, increasingly complex. Until his drawings began to look like something else entirely. A forest. Dense, intricate, alive. But this wasn't a forest. It was the brain. For the first time, someone wasn't just looking, they were seeing. Not a single mass, but countless individual cells. Separate, yet connected. Like people in a crowd, like nodes in a network, like voices in an endless conversation. It was a completely different picture. A revolution on paper. So he showed his work to the scientific world. And the response? Silence. Would have been nice. Instead, he got this. You're wrong. This is impossible. You're imagining things. Some didn't even bother arguing. They just ignored him. Because let's be honest. Who's going to trust a guy who used to blow things up, cut hair, and nearly died in a war? Doesn't exactly scream credible scientist, right? But here's the thing. Time has a way of revealing the truth. Fast forward to today. Open any neuroscience textbook. First few pages? His idea is right there. He was right. Completely right. So now the question flips. How? How does someone the world dismissed end up seeing what everyone else missed? What did he notice that others couldn't? And more importantly, how did he train his mind to see it? Because here's where the story gets even more interesting. People love to joke genius or troublemaker, same thing. Sounds like a cliche. But in a small Spanish town in the 19th century, it was a real dilemma. Because this kid, he was both. His father was a doctor, an anatomist. A man who dealt with bodies every day. Precision, structure, logic. That was his world. Everything had to make sense. Everything had to fit. His son, the complete opposite. Restless, impulsive, uncontrollable. His mother tried to soften things, to be the buffer. But as the saying goes, you can't stop a storm with a pillow. And this kid? He was a storm. He hated studying. Books gave him headaches. But hand him a pencil. And suddenly, everything changed. He lit up. He drew people, animals, anything he saw. And he was good, really good. If life had taken a different turn, he might have become an artist. Or, more likely, as another saying goes, a starving artist. But drawing wasn't his only hobby. He also loved pushing limits. One day, he decided to build something. A homemade cannon. Yes, you heard that right. Materials? Questionable. Process? Not recommended. Outcome? Boom. Neighbor's door gone. While other kids were playing games, he was running his own demolition project. At that point, his father didn't yell, didn't argue, just stared. You can almost picture it. An anatomist, looking at his son, thinking, maybe I should start by studying this brain. So the parenting strategy changed. Less talking, more intervention. But here's the problem. The more you try to suppress a force like that, the stronger it pushes back. He wasn't wired for obedience. Too curious, too impulsive, too much energy. Like a rocket without guidance. And that raises a fascinating question. How does someone who can't even control himself end up understanding and mapping the most complex organ in existence? Sounds absurd. But we're just getting started. Because his father made one more move. If school won't work, work will. So off he went. First stop, barber. Scissors in hand, working on real people. Honestly, slightly terrifying. But something unexpected happened. He focused. Really focused. He studied hair. Its thickness, its curves, its direction. Not casually. Obsessively. Like he was analyzing his system. Then came the next job, shoemaker. Leather, stitching, texture. Again, he didn't just learn the craft. He studied the structure. How pieces connect, how tension spreads, where things hold or break. Other apprentices learned skills. He learned patterns. He trained his eyes. And here's the twist. Looking back, it feels almost inevitable. That same kid who once blew up a door was now learning to see detail, to understand connections, to decode structure. Later, when he looked at neurons, he saw them like a poorly stitched shoe. Where it breaks, where it links, where it should connect. At a glance. Sounds like a superpower. But at the time, nobody saw the value. Not even his father. Until, slowly, something shifted. Maybe this kid wasn't hopeless. Maybe. He was just in the wrong system. So his father made a crucial decision. He let him study medicine. A compromise. A turning point. At last, he stepped into the world of science. On the surface, everything looked normal again. Medical school, anatomy classes, big exams. But the thing that would change everything wasn't medicine, wasn't lectures, wasn't textbooks. It was the one thing he never let go of. Drawing. A pen, a pair of eyes, and a level of persistence most people don't have. And here's the part that sounds almost unbelievable. That simple act, drawing, was about to transform science. Sounds like a joke, right? It wasn't. Because very soon, the entire world would realize just how powerful it really was. What's the most powerful tool a scientist can have? A microscope? A cutting-edge lab? No. In the hands of Santiago Ramón y Cajal, it was a pencil. Sounds almost underwhelming, right? But hold that thought. Because that humble pencil would go on to shake the foundations of neuroscience. Now picture this. He's finally in medical school. White coat, anatomy classes, everything looks respectable. And his father, the strict anatomist, decides to step in personally. No shortcuts. He pulls his son into the lab and says, "Draw. Not write, not memorize. Draw. Muscles, bones, layer by layer." At first, it's just an assignment. Then it becomes a habit. And eventually, it becomes a superpower. Because Cajal realizes something most people miss. Drawing isn't about copying, it's about understanding. If you draw a bone, you need to know where it begins, where it connects, why it curves, why it fits there and not somewhere else. Otherwise, you can't draw it. So he starts mentally disassembling everything. Not physically but in his mind. Structure, space, relationships. Take it apart, rebuild it, piece by piece. While others are memorizing textbooks, he's mapping reality. While others cram facts, he's decoding structure. And exams? That's where it gets almost funny. Everyone else is nervous, hands shaking, writing frantically. And there he is, calm, drawing, thinking while drawing, understanding while thinking. You can almost see it. An exam hall full of stressed students. And one guy casually sketching beautiful anatomical diagrams like he's hosting a private art exhibition. The professor probably wondered, did this guy walk into the wrong room? But when the grades came out, he did just fine, because he wasn't recalling answers. He was seeing them. And here's the dangerous part. Not for him, for the entire scientific establishment. Because once you truly understand structure, you start questioning assumptions. Like this one, is the brain really one continuous mass? That question doesn't explode immediately. It just sits there, quiet, waiting, because before he can answer it, life throws him into something else, a survival test, and not an easy one. We're talking extreme mode. He graduates, ready to start his career. Then comes the order. Cuba, military doctor. Sounds honorable. In reality, it's like being dropped into a nightmare. War, a tropical heat disease. All at once. The air is heavy, the ground burns, everyone is sick. You save someone, and the next moment, you might collapse yourself. And he does. Malaria hits first. Fever, shaking chills, like being trapped between fire and ice. Just when he starts recovering. Tuberculosis. Coughing, a weakness, rapid weight loss. He's not thriving. He's barely surviving. At this point, he doesn't look like a future scientist. He looks like someone about to be erased from history. You could say, he wasn't treating patients. He was fighting to stay alive. And there were no checkpoints. A lot of people would have stopped there. He didn't. He clawed his way back. Not gracefully, but stubbornly, step by step. And when he finally returns to Spain, something has changed. Not his personality, his perspective. He becomes obsessed with life. Not in an abstract way. In a concrete, almost urgent way. Cells as structures, mechanisms. How do they work? Why do they fail? Why do some survive and others don't? This isn't curiosity anymore. It's a question forced by proximity to death. And yet, he still hasn't made his big breakthrough. Not yet. He's just standing at the door. With a pencil, a sharper eyes, and a story that almost ended everything. The door isn't open. But behind it, the secrets of the brain. Now here's a wild question. Can one person take on an entire scientific community? Sounds like madness. But this time, it's not madness. It's Santiago Ramón y Cajal again. He returns from Cuba. Body still recovering. Mind already accelerating. He steps into academia. But not the easy version. No elite network. No massive funding. No team of collaborators debating ideas daily. What he has is simple. A modest lab. A desk. A not so impressive microscope. A stack of paper, and that same pencil. Meanwhile, life keeps moving. He gets married. He starts a family. 1 child. 2.3. 7. Yes, 7. By day, he studies the brain. By night, he's surrounded by 7 tiny, unpredictable experiments. In a way, he's observing 2 nervous systems. One under the microscope. One in his living room. Which one is more complex? Hard to say. He's introverted. Not into social events. If he can skip a gathering, he will. If he can avoid small talk, even better. He prefers silence. Sitting, watching, looking, and looking again. 4 hours. Most people would get bored. He thinks, not enough. That kind of mind is dangerous, because once it starts questioning something, it doesn't let go. At the time, the scientific world agrees on one thing. The nervous system is continuous. Like a net. No real boundaries. Everything connected. Imagine a tangled web. No breaks. No individual units. That's the dominant theory. Backed by authority, repeated in papers. Everyone nods. Seems right. Then Cajal looks. And frowns. Not because he doesn't understand, but because he sees too clearly. He asks a simple question: are there really no boundaries? Once that question is asked, there's no going back. He starts observing, again and again. Different samples, different angles, different conditions. The more he looks, the more something feels off. What appears continuous sometimes isn't. Sometimes it's just close, not connected. That tiny gap, that almost invisible difference, begins to unravel everything. But science doesn't run on intuition. It needs evidence, and evidence needs tools. Right on cue, a breakthrough appears. From Camillo Golgi, a staining method, one that makes nerve cells visible under a microscope. They light up, emerge from the blur. It's powerful, but unpredictable. Sometimes it stains many cells, sometimes just a few. Most scientists use it to get a general sense. Looks complex. Interesting. Move on. Cajal? He pauses. Wait. This isn't for glancing. This is for seeing. Where others look at the whole, he zooms into the details. Where others ask, does it look like a network? He asks, where exactly does it connect, or not? And then, he goes all in. Slice after slice, stain after stain. Fail, retry, fail again, try again. Hours at the microscope. Sometimes an entire day. Then, the pencil. Every branch to every turn to every almost connection. Captured. And something strange happens. His drawings start to speak. Not literally. Logically. When a structure is clear enough, relationships emerge. When enough relationships emerge, patterns appear. And when patterns appear, the theory begins to crack. He becomes convinced. These nerve cells, they're not one mass. They're separate, independent, close, but not fused. Like people standing together, talking, exchanging ideas, but still individuals. If that's true, then the entire field is wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. That's not a correction, that's flipping the table. And history isn't always kind to people who flip tables. But he doesn't stop. He keeps observing, keeps drawing, keeps questioning, getting closer and closer to a conclusion, one that will change everything. And then comes the most dangerous step. Not thinking, not doubting, but proving. Because here's the problem. He can see it, but no one else can. Late 1880s. Santiago Ramón y Cajal is no longer just questioning. He's experimenting, actively. He takes Camillo Golgi's staining method and starts tweaking it. Timing, concentration, conditions. Trial and error. Like a chef perfecting a recipe. Too much? Start over. Too little? Adjust again. His goal is simple. Make the neurons clearer, more isolated, more true to themselves. Most people end up with a tangled mess, like overcooked noodles stuck together. But in his hands, something changes. Sometimes, only a few cells are stained. Most would call that failure. He calls it opportunity. Because when everything else is dark, and just a few cells light up, structure reveals itself. Boundaries appear. He leans into the microscope. Doesn't move. Hours pass. Others glance once. Don't really get it. Lights off, they leave. He stays. 10 times, 20 times. Different focus, different angles. Piecing it together. Like solving an impossible puzzle. And the final image? Forms in his mind. Then, the pencil again. A main branch, then splits again. Like a tree, like lightning. Complex. Yes, but that's not the key. The key is the gaps. He notices something subtle, but profound. These nerve cells come incredibly close, almost touching, but not quite. They don't merge. They don't fuse. They stop, right at the edge of contact. Like two people facing each other, talking, exchanging, but still, two people, not one. A tiny observation, but with massive implications. Because it means, the brain isn't a continuous web. It's made of individual units. Separate, defined, connected but not merged. Today, we call them neurons. And this idea? It becomes known as the neuron doctrine. In simple terms, your brain isn't a blended soup. It's more like a carefully arranged dish, each piece distinct, each connection meaningful. They communicate, but they don't lose themselves. Sounds obvious now, right? But back then, this was like kicking down the front door of science, because the mainstream said, everything is continuous. And he said, no, and not quietly, with evidence. Piece by piece, he dismantled the old theory. No slogans. No shouting, just observation and drawings. A quiet revolution. No crowds. No banners, just one man, one microscope, one pencil, slowly changing how humanity understands itself. Sounds heroic, but reality? Not so kind, because what happened next was simple. No one believed him. Some award ceremonies are celebrations. Others, they're public disasters. The 1906 Nobel Prize ceremony, definitely the second kind. That year, two names were announced together: Santiago Ramón y Cajal丨BrainMapping. On paper, it sounds perfect. One invented a revolutionary staining method, the other used it to uncover something extraordinary. A dream team, teacher and student, a science at its best. Except, that's not what this was. Because these two men didn't just disagree, they collided. Golgi believed the nervous system was continuous. One giant web. No real boundaries. Cajal flat out rejected it. No, he said, they're separate, individual units. This wasn't a minor academic disagreement. This was a clash of worldviews. Now imagine this. You and someone else have been arguing for years, completely opposite ideas, neither of you backs down. And then one day, you both win the same prize, and you have to stand on the same stage and give speeches. Yeah, tension off the charts. The audience must have been thinking, all right, let's see what happens. No punches were thrown, but honestly, it was more intense than a fight. Golgi speaks first, confident, unshaken. His message, boiled down: I'm still right. Yes, on the Nobel stage, in front of the world, he doubles down on his theory, which basically translates to, the other guy? He's wrong. If there were cameras cutting to reactions, this is where they'd zoom in on Cajal. But Cajal, he doesn't back off. When it's his turn, he's calm, measured. But make no mistake, he doesn't concede an inch. He walks the audience through his observations, his drawings, his logic, step by step. Neurons are separate, not fused, not one continuous network. If you strip it down, his speech is basically, thank you for the award. And by the way, the previous speaker is mistaken. One of the most awkward award ceremonies in history. No contest. You can almost picture the audience clapping politely while thinking, this isn't a ceremony, it's a debate. And not just any debate, a high-level, evidence-driven showdown. No shouting. No drama. Just facts colliding. Because that's what science really is. Not about who speaks louder, not about who has more authority, but who is closer to the truth. At the time, no one could settle it. The tools weren't good enough. Microscopes just didn't have the resolution. That tiny missing detail made all the difference. So the debate continued. But here's the thing about time. It's a very patient judge. Decades later, a new tool arrives. The electron microscope. Suddenly, resolution explodes. Details sharpen. Those almost connections between neurons? Now visible. Clear. And the answer finally emerges. Neurons are separate, distinct, individual. Cajal was right. Not because he was louder, not because he had a prize, but because the evidence landed on his side. And Golgi, his method was still brilliant, still essential, but his interpretation? Wrong. Harsh? Maybe. Fair? Absolutely. Because science isn't about authority. It's not first come, first served. It's more like a long detective story. Everyone brings clues. Some guesses are right, some are wrong. But the final verdict belongs to the evidence. And on that stage, those two names together represent something bigger. One built the tool, the other saw the truth. Conflict, debate, collision. And in the end, humanity moved one step closer to understanding the brain. Now here's the part that hits closer to home. You've already used his idea today. More than once. From the moment you woke up to right now, staring at this screen. Every second, you're using it. You just don't notice. What Santiago Ramón y Cajal left behind isn't just a set of papers. It's a way of seeing the brain. Before him, the brain was like a pot of soup. Everything mixed together, indistinguishable. After him, everything changed. Not physically, but conceptually. The brain was broken down into units. Individual neurons. Connected, communicating, but independent. That's the foundation of modern neuroscience. Without it, everything built on top collapses. Think about the words you hear today. Neural circuits is synaptic transmission, signal encoding. All of them depend on one assumption. Neurons are individual units. Take that away, and the whole framework falls apart. Let's make it real. Take Alzheimer's disease. Memory's fade is slowly erased. Why? Because certain neurons fail, connections break, signals can't pass through. Or Parkinson's disease. Tremors is slowed movement. It's not just muscles. It's neurons. The ones controlling movement start going offline. If you still believed the brain was one continuous mass, none of this would make sense. And treatment? Forget it. So everything you see today, drug development, brain research, neural repair, even brain-computer interfaces, they all come down to one thing. How neurons connect, how they communicate, where the breakdown happens, and how to fix it. Still sounds abstract? Try this. Imagine your brain as a meeting room. Inside are countless participants. Your neurons. Each one has a voice. Some are rational, some emotional, some completely chaotic. When you're happy, certain voices dominate. When you're anxious, a different group takes over. When you're overwhelmed, everyone's talking at once. Total noise. So your memories, your emotions, your hesitation, they're all the result of a meeting, a neural meeting. And what Cajal did was tell the world, this isn't a crowd mashed into one blob. It's individuals communicating. Small difference? Not really. That distinction determines whether we can understand ourselves, repair ourselves, maybe even change ourselves. And here's where it gets even more interesting. At some point, people looked at the brain and thought, what if we copy this? And like the old saying goes, good artists copy, great artists steal. So they did. They borrowed the idea. Neurons became nodes. Connections became weights. Signals became computations. And just like that, neural networks were born. Sounds sophisticated, but at its core, it's honest. AI isn't entirely artificial. It's the most dedicated student copying the brain's homework, with a few upgrades. But that core idea? Where did it come from? From that original insight. The brain is a network of individual units. Without that, there's nothing to imitate. So in a way, a lot of the AI systems you use today, they carry Cajal's shadow. He never wrote a line of code, but he defined the structure. And structure is where everything begins. From brain to machine. One continuous line of ideas, stretching further and further. But rewind the story. Back to a quiet room. A desk, a microscope, a pencil. That's where it started. And what he left behind wasn't just science. It was something more. People often forget. Cajal was an artist-level scientist. His neuron drawings weren't just data. They were art. Elegant lines, clear structures. They look like trees, like lightning, like poetry in biological form. Even today, they're still admired. Not just because they're accurate, but because they're beautiful. That's rare. Science is usually cold, art is usually emotional. He fused them, understanding the world, while sketching it. And as a person, he wasn't flashy. Didn't chase crowds. Didn't seek the spotlight. If anything, he lived a little offline. But he had one trait, simple and powerful. He didn't quit. When others didn't understand, he kept looking. When others didn't believe, he kept drawing. When others rejected him, he kept proving. Step by step. Slow, but relentless. And eventually, the world caught up. So if there's one line to take away about him, and maybe about science itself, it's this: great discoveries don't belong to the smartest people. They belong to the ones who refuse to stop. Remember the question we started with? How did we come to understand the brain? It wasn't some futuristic machine appearing out of nowhere. No sudden breakthrough. No cinematic eureka moment. Honestly, it's almost underwhelming. It was one person, sitting there, looking again, and then looking some more. For years. Santiago Ramón y Cajal. No cutting-edge lab. No massive research team. No head start. What he had was something else. A kind of stubborn patience. The ability to take something impossibly complex, and slowly, piece by piece, make it clear. Picture this scene. Dim light. A basic microscope, imperfect samples. Nothing about it screams history in the making. And yet, he stays. He stares. Until those blurry lines start to mean something. That doesn't sound dramatic, but it is rare. Because most people, when things get complicated, take a step back. Too much. Not worth it. Maybe later. Like the saying goes, if it ain't easy, it ain't for me. But not him. He leans in. A little closer. A little longer. He looks again, draws again. Until the world begins to reveal itself. And at that point, the question quietly changes. It's no longer just, how did we understand the brain? It becomes something bigger. How do humans understand anything? Now the answer starts to take shape. We don't figure things out by memorizing everything, and we don't get there by guessing. We get there through a specific skill. Seeing structure, taking chaos, and breaking it apart. Finding patterns, boundaries, connections. Once you can do that, the world stops feeling like a blur. It gains layers, a logic. A path you can actually follow. The brain works like that. Physics works like that. Life works like that. Even your own life works like that. Because most of the time, when things feel messy, it's not just that they're complicated. It's that the structure isn't clear yet. And what Santiago Ramón y Cajal really did was surprisingly simple. He didn't invent the brain. He taught us how to look, where to look, what to look for, how to notice that tiny gap, where things almost connect, but don't. That skill matters more than any single answer. Because answers change, tools get better, the theories get replaced. But the way of seeing, that sticks. It gets passed down, generation after generation. So if you circle back to that original question, how did we come to understand the brain? You might answer it differently now. It wasn't just microscopes. Or staining techniques. Or even theories. It was a person, a pair of eyes. A pencil, and a refusal to quit. Turning the world from something blurry into something clear. And maybe that's what he really gave us. Not just conclusions, but a way of seeing. A way that keeps pulling us closer to the truth. Because at the end of the day, seeing is believing. And sometimes, seeing is everything. The people who change the world usually just think one step deeper. If this story made you see things differently, hit like, subscribe, and save it. See you in the next story.